Welcome to the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I'm dedicated to helping you take control of your life. Are you ready? Let's go do this. So, Marc, as we pick up, we've been talking for, at least an hour and a half now. And if somebody's just listening, we have to tell them listen to the other three Wednesday wisdoms.
You have to follow a little bit what we're talking about. Yeah.
Follow the string of thinking here. And you've reminded me that every person who listens to my podcast is precious. And I
Ah,
knew that. They are, and I appreciate everybody. I appreciate everybody who listens, so
yeah. Again, we go back to this size doesn't matter. The data that I made you realize that is you were telling me, I don't know, oh, I just had 50 downloads on that
Oh,
episode,
yeah.
something like that.
You blew me
And I was
away. It
like,
was months
all
ago.
right, Sue, that's great. Now go in the street and gather 50 people to listen
Yeah.
to your little advice on finding a life coach. Go, just
Yeah.
go.
Yeah,
Just go. I'll
yeah.
pay you to do it. If you find someone, put them in a room, talk about your thing. Like, hey, you reach 50 souls.
Mhm.
That's
That's
what you
right.
did. That's
That's
what we're
right.
doing right now. It doesn't matter if it's not 500, 5,000, 5,000,000.
Mm,
You need to start small and build from there. And if you don't
right.
value those little 50 views, you'll never value those 5 million views. Ever.
Right. Right. And
Ever.
I value all them. And you know what's interesting about that you also brought the more I thought about it, the more I realized is yes, the number and I think at the time when we were talking, it was I think you asked me how many people were listening. I said, "Oh, Mark, it's like only 25 people." That was my
Okay.
response. And you're like, "Well, go out to the coffee shop and get 25 people to sign up and listen to your podcast right now. Do you know how hard that is?" And you blew my mind that day.
Mm,
But then I started thinking about that more and I realized, well, wait a minute. If 25 people listen, and suppose 10 of them share it with somebody else. So the number shows 25 people on the count, right, on
mhm.
my dashboard, but that's not really an accurate reflection of what it could be.
No.
Because
And
maybe
also,
somebody is taking what they're listening to right now and they go and they share it with somebody else.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that
That's why
appreciation. Yeah.
you need to be careful when you look at numbers when you have a
Yes.
podcast. So for the people that don't know me, I own podcastproducer.com. I'm a podcast producer. So
And you produce
um
mine.
and yeah, what's happening with numbers is you cannot just take the numbers of download that you have. You need to take the what you do with that episode. Where do you distribute it?
Mhm.
And what do you do with that? Do you do a newsletter? Do you do a blog article? Do you post stuff on your social media? Because all that counts. I've seen people with podcasts that has, I'm not kidding, 100 downloads per episode, maybe 100. Like they were reaching maybe on their podcast like 500, 800 people or per month, but on one social media platform they could reach half a million people.
Mm.
So if you take a look at the amount of downloads just on the podcast, and you don't put it in the rest of your marketing campaign, or how it impacts your whole digital presence, you know, uh, you're a bit in the wrong. And the other thing is, when you have a podcast, also it, it's easier for you to meet people,
Yeah,
because
sure.
like the last episode, I was really impressed by you, because you can really feel that now you've met a few life coach. You can see that, like, now you can take someone and give advice. And you gave me like a super cool exercise called the room exercise, where when you feel overwhelmed, you have the feeling that you have a bunch of crap in your mind, and you told me to visualize some sort of a room, and you're in the room of that topic. So you gave me an exercise that was very, very powerful. And you can see the benefit of hosting your podcast, because you get to
Sure.
meet people that share with you their knowledge, their experience, and you grow through that. And how do you quantify that
Yeah, it's
you
hard
know
to. Yeah, and let's back that up a minute, and let's put that on a timeline. Mark, I've been doing this for a year and a half now at the
Mhm.
time of this recording, and if you asked me when I started where I thought I would be at this point in time right now, I never could have imagined it. And the
Mm.
people that I've met along the way and the people that I've talked to and the opportunities that have come out of it, I realized that I just came to the conclusion of like, fuck the timeline. Like, who has like really just screw the timeline? Like,
Mm.
because really, why do I have to arrive at a certain place? Or why does the number of my downloads have to be exponentially greater than what they were this time
Mm.
last year? Because the downloads, like you said, the numbers, if you look at the numbers and you see the numbers too, they're not grandiose.
No.
They're on the podcast numbers, Spotify shows one thing, YouTube shows another. It's like, how do you even know? But
Yeah.
yet I don't I don't put my self-worth and the worth of the podcast in the number of downloads that I have.
I
And
hear you
then when
completely.
I let go of the timeline and look at where I came from and where I am now, I don't I don't say, "Oh, I wanna be here in a year."
Yes.
I'm gonna surrender to the timeline, show up, I show up every day,
Yes. Yes.
and then allow things to play out. What are your thoughts on fuck the timeline?
You need fuck the timeline, but I think it comes down to expectation as well, right? Because there's a lot of people like usually when I go on like a discovery call with a client, and usually when I do this, I'm trying to find if it's a fit or not.
Mhm,
I'm not trying to sell anything. I don't need to sell anything to you. I have nothing to
mhm,
prove you. I know I can deliver gold podcasts. I don't care. I want to know if we're a fit. And sometimes the red flags that tells me that it's not a fit is when, okay, Mark. So how many download are you promising me? How many followers I'm gonna get on Instagram? How many subscribers I'll get on Facebook, on
yeah,
YouTube? Put this on a spreadsheet with a clear timeline of every quarter and blah blah blah. And then that's when I'm like, dude, you didn't even start recording, and you're telling me that I need to promise you that you're gonna get downloads and followers.
right.
No. And if you tell that to a shady podcast producer, you're gonna buy the downloads, you're gonna
Yeah,
buy the followers,
yeah,
you
yeah,
can
yeah,
do that. You're like, okay, yes, sir. I'll promise you I will give you 500 subscribers per month. Click, click, 500 subscriber. You know what I mean? Like it's meaningless,
yeah,
completely meaningless. Like when you start from scratch, right? If you have a podcast is already going that have a certain rhythm, a certain, that has a community around it, and that's different. But I think it comes down to expectations. Is we
mm,
put a timeline, we set a goal, and we set like the expectation, thinking that's the only way I'm going to make this podcast successful. I'm going to feel successful if I reach
mhm,
that amount of downloads.
yeah,
But when you take in consideration the impact of your podcast in your life, and what it's allowing you to do, meeting new people, getting content for your social media. And all of a sudden, wait, when you show up for an interview to get like maybe a nice job as a COO of something, or chief, or a CEO of whatever,
general manager,
yeah, general manager, it doesn't
uproot your
matter.
life and move.
Well, you know what? The
Yeah,
employer go online and click Sue Saller, enter, bang, and you have a
right,
website. You have hundreds of episodes recorded about on mindset, and you get maybe you get a higher paying job. Your
yeah,
podcast doesn't monetize, but it does.
it does, yeah,
It does
and
if
I
you
always said
dedicate
that,
yourself to it. Because I'm telling you, anyone listening to this, if you want to start a podcast and the goal of becoming a podcaster, you are so wrong. It will never happen. It will
right,
never, ever, ever, ever happen. Being a podcaster, full time podcaster, very few podcaster can
yeah,
do it. Very few. And it's a full time job.
almost,
That's
yeah,
because that
I
means
agree,
you need to strike deals with sponsors. You need to do collaborative piece of content. You will most likely need to have a real studio, because Zoom based recorded podcasts, they're not going to do that good unless you're famous already, right?
yeah,
It
it's a
takes
lot of
a
work,
certain infrastructure. If you want to have your own studio at home and you want to do live camera, you need a filming crew, maybe not a huge one, but you need a producer, a director, like someone, an assistant, things like someone at sound, like it starts to be like a serious business, so I try to stay away from the people that want to start a podcast just to become podcaster. I need people that a podcast is a tool for them for something else, like you, for example. Your
Yeah,
podcast is a tool to grow as a human being, for sure, because you meet a bunch of life coach, right? And it's a tool for you to, because you have a book on the way, you have things. Oh,
that's
maybe I
right.
wasn't allowed to say it, but
Yeah, no, no, no,
you
it's all good.
you're
Yeah,
okay. You have a book
yeah,
on
you
the
didn't let the
way.
cat out of
You
the bag. Yeah, the
you
book
know you
comes
have a
out in,
website. You have a
no, the
what?
book is September.
September.
End of
Stay
August,
tuned.
September. I just handed it off to the publisher to
And
go
now,
into edit.
listen to me. Would you have written that book without having your own podcast?
Would I have
Would
written that book without having my own podcast? I
meeting
would
that
s
amount of people and
Yeah, I would say the podcast definitely opened doors, no
mhm.
question, and the podcast actually, you know what? The podcast is the reason I met you.
Yes,
And
yes,
the
yes,
podcast is the reason that I found my perfect life coach. I found Austin.
yeah, yeah.
Without the podcast, I would not have met him. Without the podcast, I would not have found the publisher that I hired for my book. Let's see,
Ah,
without so those are the ones off the top of my head. I'm sure there's
but
more in there, but without the podcast, those things may not have materialized the way they did. And going back to screw the timeline, they happened on a timeline I didn't expect,
ah, see,
you know?
you
So,
see.
without the podcast, no, I think the impetus for the book or the drive for the book was my coach.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. I
that's
see,
where
but
the
it's linked to your
yeah, but it's the lead to the
regardless,
podcast, right,
it's linked to podcasting, and you met with a
correct.
bunch of writers. There's a book I see behind you, Arete, right? That
Yes,
was
Brian
Johnston,
Johnson. Yeah,
Brian
Brian
Johnston,
Johnson, yeah.
right? Like you meet other writers and you're like, "Oh, you wrote a book. Who's your publisher? How did you write it? How long did you take?" And
Yeah,
then how do you quantify this?
you
How do you
don't. You
quantify the
can't.
benefit of your podcast when it's just like giving some sort of a sense to your life and a way to live your life and a direction to take and all that?
Yeah.
So
For me, it's a creative outlet, Mark.
yes,
Like,
yes,
this
yes,
is a
yes.
way where I came alive in my
Uh,
podcast, and it's funny, it didn't start out that way. My
okay,
podcast
yes,
started out as a desire to serve the people in the mastermind group that I was in, and there were these really cool stories of people taking small steps that led to big wins. I'm like, "Hey, cool, let's capture that within," and I just started talking to people, and then as I started talking to people, I realized how much I enjoyed it
yes, and you
and how
became
much
better at it as well.
yeah, thank you. I
Yeah.
forced myself to because when you edit your own podcast and you listen to yourself speak, I was like, "Ooh, I don't like
Uh,
that." So now I need to get better at that.
now imagine if you spoke and glitch like me. I hear my accent. I'm like,
Yeah. I love your accent. See,
no,
isn't that funny? A matter of perspective. Hey, you know what? It's funny. What you don't like about you, other people like about you.
that's funny. Yeah, 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 yeah. That's
And how
very
we
funny.
walk around having this perception that, "Oh, they don't like, there's this X quality about me that nobody else likes,"
Yeah.
and how we just need to let that stuff go
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
and let it and
Absolutely,
just
absolutely.
not even really think about it like that because, like, you wouldn't have known. If you didn't say that, you wouldn't have known. I like your accent. I
I
like
think
it.
I'm gonna get used to it. Maybe it's because my daughter laugh at me too much. Like that's the thing in my house. Like
That's funny.
I live in Barcelona. In Barcelona, we speak in the province of Barcelona. But in Catalonia, we speak Catalan. Most of the people I live in Catalan. I don't live in Spanish. Actually, I have a way better Catalan than
Mm.
Spanish, which is very rare for a foreigner, right? But still, I have an accent when I speak, and my kids, they laugh at me all the time. They laugh at my accent all the time. I'm like, fuck off. And my kids, they were born in America. They speak like an American English with no accent
Mhm.
whatsoever. They speak Spanish with no accent whatsoever, Catalan with no accent whatsoever. It's like
Well, in their defense, they're what? How old are they now? 10, 11.
11, yeah.
Yeah, shit, that stuff's easy. I mean, they could probably pick up another language and not
Yeah,
have
then
that
they speak
accent
four
either,
languages.
just
Yeah.
yeah, they speak 4 languages, and whereas us in the United States, I wouldn't say it's all across the board, but if you go in the public education system, they don't start teaching Spanish until 7th grade, which is around
Oof.
age 11, which is really too late. You should
Yeah.
learn it when you're very young, and then
Yeah.
that way it stays embedded longer and you're able to absorb it easier. But anyway, and we digress off of timelines.
No, but I was about to
But
go
that
back
was
on timeline
yeah,
because
go
it
ahead.
is linked to what we're saying.
Mhm,
I speak, I like to say I speak four language and a half, almost five, right? And you know what? I n- I'm gonna say something really weird, but I never lived here without speaking the language, even if I didn't speak it. Let me explain. I never said to myself I don't speak Catalan because from the moment I knew how to say, "Oh, sorry, I'm not from here. How can you speak slower?" I knew I was speaking it. So if I came back and I started to build up that plan of learning Catalan with clear deadlines. So this month I'm gonna learn this, this, and that, and next month I will be that level, and the third month I will be that level, and I'll take another class. No, 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 no. I just completely let it go. I started very basic, learning like very basic, like basic, but basic stuff, just to go around,
mhm,
just to be able to say, "Hey, sorry, can you speak slower? Oh, how do you say this in English? How do you in Catalan? How do you say this in Catalan? Oh, un
mhm,
got. Oh, okay, all right, cool. That's a got. All right, nice. Un got. Now I know that's got. Un vaso in Spanish, whatever. You know, you speak it, so there's no deadline.
right.
You just do it, you commit to it, and you go, and it applies to everything. Deadlines are, of course, we're business people, so we know about deadlines. The 15th
Yeah.
of April, the
Oh,
taxes
yeah,
need to
yeah.
be filled in and sent over.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
we
I
know
gotta get
that.
that podcast out on April 15th,
So
right? While we
yes,
were just
exactly.
talking about the taxes.
um
But so, like, deadlines are important,
they
and I
are,
and I
but
don't
not
want
everything.
people listening to say, "Oh, well, just screw the timeline. I don't need a deadline. I don't need a goal. I don't need to think out or work out that way." I think what I would like, and I know you would like people to walk away with is having that timeline. It's good to have a goal, but it's also good to hold it if you can, and if it's one of those goals that you can, hold it loosely and
Of course.
allow the events of life to unfold the way that they're going to unfold. And even
Yes.
just my life, just a real quick snippet back in January, I there were certain things that I wanted to do in life, like that I knew I'm not even going to go into it, but there were a list of things that I was looking for. And as I was talking to Austin, my coach, and he's like, you know what, Sue, be patient. There's
Mm.
these list of these 4 things that you want, but be and they weren't happening. And I'm like, "Austin, I want them to happen today. I wanted to get over it." He's like, "Wait." He's like, "Just let it go." And he's like, "Why don't you just let life unfold?" And
Yes.
2 weeks ago, but about a week and a half ago, what I was trying to manifest and push and make happen in January happened organically all at once 2 weeks
Yes.
ago in an event that I mean, I showed up for the event. I did what I needed to do, but just like that archer, the archer analogy where an archer, they practice, they put their eye on the goal, like on the target, but
Yeah.
the second they let that arrow go, fate kicks in,
Yeah.
So I did all my preparation as an archer. I showed up,
Yeah.
but what happened, the outcome I could not have predicted. And then an opportunity came my way that hit all of the metrics, all the things that I wanted back in January. And Austin reminded me it was in perfect timing and it was
Yes.
on a different timeline. It was
Of
on a
course.
timeline that I couldn't have anticipated.
Of course.
So,
And the whole coaching industry also is built on timelines. There's a lot of
mm,
coach. No, Austin is not like that, but there's a
no,
lot of
he's not.
coaches say, okay, we're gonna we're gonna set a benchmark and certain goals, and you're gonna hit that goal there. That, and I know Austin can do it with certain
He
clients, I think,
does,
but
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 we left it
it's not his
loose.
approach.
No, no,
It's
no, it's
That's not
not
his
his
approach.
approach. No, he went back at
He-
the end of every 12 weeks, and he was like, "Well, look at how far you came, even though you didn't hit what you thought you were going to hit." He was very skilled. He was very intentional to show me that I got from point A to point B and that growth happened even though the outcome wasn't the way I had expected it. And I
Yeah.
think that translates into timelines as well. You know,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
timeline moves forward where you are 12 weeks later, 15 weeks later, a month later, whatever time frame you put, even though it's not exactly what you wanted it to be, you're still further ahead.
Exactly.
So,
Because you can, like there's an example that comes into my mind is like there's some people they sell all their program to stop smoking. Learn how to stop smoking in 20 easy step.
yeah,
You know what's the best way to stop smoking, Sue?
just stop right then, right
Just
there.
stop. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm
No,
not saying you're gonna have a real bad time, but there's no way around that.
right.
Stop smoking.
Yeah.
Basta. That's it.
You but
Stop
you well,
smoking.
you just now identify yourself as a non-smoker. That's
Exactly.
the
So
other
all those
mindset too.
benchmark and those
Right,
step and timeline and okay, on after this month you're gonna go down to one cigarette a day, and then it's gonna be this and that, and then you hit those mark to sort of where at the end of the day the solution is simple. You made your mind to stop smoking. Stop smoking. It's gonna be hard. Go through it. You know what I mean? But
right.
commit to it and keep going. But we
Yeah.
need to be careful with timeline because sometimes we treat ourselves with a total lack of compassion.
Bingo,
We
bingo.
we're like timeline and we get disappointed or we think we're not enough, so we put certain goals and blah 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 blah. Where commit to it. Fuck the timeline. Commit
And
to
commit
it.
to it. You know what
You know.
I love that, Mark. You know what I found? That when I let go of the expectation of completing something that was big, when I let go of exactly when I wanted it to happen, it happened in perfect timing.
Yes.
And I think that's a very nice way for us to put a bow on this conversation about, screw the timeline.
Through the timeline.
Screw the timeline. If there's something that you want to achieve, there's nothing wrong with putting it on a vision board. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with wanting to achieve that thing. What
And
we want everybody to walk away with is screw the timeline on it because it could happen sooner, it could happen later, but it always happens in its perfect time.
absolutely screw the timeline except for tax season.
Yeah, there's some things you have to do. Yeah, and getting the podcast out. Like,
Yeah,
you gotta
exactly.
yeah, you gotta get a podcast out on Sunday. Like, I
Of
can't
course.
screw that timeline or
Of
it's
course,
not
of
gonna
course.
happen.
But sometime, how can you put a timeline on having a better life? How can you put
Right,
a timeline on
right,
feeling better? How do you
right,
put a timeline on being less reactive or less stressed? What are you
right.
talking about?
Right. I think it's what you're putting exactly what you just said. It's what you're putting a timeline on.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Mark, thanks. This is another cool conversation. I
Thank
enjoyed it
you,
a
Stu. Thank you.
100%. And, our one small step for everybody today that's going to help them change their tomorrow is fuck the timeline.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I value your time with me and I seek to make every moment count. In order to make lasting change in your life, listening is usually not enough. So I want to ask you, what practical steps are you going to put into action today as a result of listening to this podcast? Remember, any step, any action, no matter how small, starts your journey to a big win. And if you're not sure where to get started, check out my website, personalcoachfinder.com, and find someone who can help. Remember, life doesn't get better by chance, it gets better by choice. Take small steps today and make your life awesome, friends.